For this evening's program, we have, as you can see on the screen, two other people sharing the screen with me. And the first person and the only person I'm going to introduce is Ronnie Diamondstein. Ronnie, as many of you might know, is our acting library board president. But she's a woman of many talents. She's also a freelance writer, an award-winning photographer, a public relations consultant, and former school library media specialist and teacher. She has served on the boards of the Chappaqua Children's Book Festival, the Newcastle Community Media Center, and the League of Women Voters, as well as being a project manager for the Newcastle Council for Race and Equality. Equity, I'm sorry. And she's also been an interviewer. And among those that she has interviewed are Vice President Walter Mundale, fashion designer Eileen Fisher, dancer and choreographer Edward Villela, and Tony Award winner James Norton, as well as White House correspondent April Ryan. Many of you might know her because she lives here at Chappaqua since 1997 and is well known for her dog, Maggie May Pup Reporter. So please welcome Ronnie Diamondstein.
Thank you so much, Joan. And it's my privilege to introduce Rick Tyler. Rick is a thought-provoking political analyst for MSNBC, offering viewers a broad perspective on unfolding political events. He's the co-founder of Foundry Strategies, a strategic communications consulting firm specializing in helping political and corporate clients reach their leadership potential. Rick was a national spokesperson for Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential campaign. And before that, Rick was a senior member of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich's staff for more than a decade, serving as an advisor and spokesperson. As a professional political strategist, Rick has helped hundreds of candidates prepare for the rigors of campaigning for public office. And he has volunteered thousands of hours to train citizens, candidates, and public officials and their staffs in the United States and abroad how to be effective leaders. Rick has been a guest lecturer at the Institute for Politics at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, the Robert J. Dole Institute for Politics at the University of Kansas, and the Global Center for Political Engagement at George Washington University. Tonight, as our guest, Rick is the author of Still Right, an Immigrant-Loving, Hybrid-Driving, Composting American Makes the Case for Conservatism. And we're so happy to have you with us tonight, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, Joan, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for the Chappaqua Library and all that you do, and having me as your guest. I'm looking forward to tonight.
Well, we were much looking forward to having you come here tonight. As some people may know, we really wanted to have you in person, and we were trying to arrange that before the pandemic, but then we couldn't, so we're very happy to have you with us virtually. So Rick, I want to get started. I have to tell you, I love the title of the book, The Double Entendre of Still Right, and the list of what you wouldn't expect to describe a conservative, immigrant-loving, hybrid-driving, and composting. The book is chock full of lots of interesting little nuggets of facts, and Publishers Weekly, when they reviewed the book, they said it was a jolt of common sense. So Rick, what's your message in the book, and who is your audience?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I had long discussions with the publisher that nobody is going to want to buy this book for two reasons. One is that the so-called the Republican Party and the so-called conservatives in the Republican Party are mad at me because I've been very critical of Trump. And which progressive is ever going to want to buy a book that makes the case for conservatism? But nevertheless, they published it anyway. It's kind of interesting. When I wrote the proposal for this book, I got a lot of rejections, like a lot of authors do. but I got one back from St. Martin's, and it was Steve Powers. He basically rewrote the proposal. Now, if you're an author and you submit a proposal, the publisher is never going to rewrite your proposal for you. So don't get that's never going to happen. I mean, it's just it was so uncanny that he spent a great deal of time in the book, and he sent it back to me, and he says, if you write this book, I'll publish it, which was a great book. I mean, his idea was a great book, but I honestly, I felt unqualified to write it. I didn't feel like I had the stature to write it. I didn't know that I had all the tools and the available history to write it. And he said, you can write this book. And he encouraged me to do it. And I did it. And that's how the book came to fruition. I did have some help. John Clark is a very good friend of mine who is also a writer. And he was with me from the very beginning of this project. We did a lot of back and forth throughout the whole project. So he's really been a co-partner in this whole adventure.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting way of things working out for you because it is unusual for an editor to help you write your proposal, but you really hit a lot of important aspects of conservatism in the book. What do you think the biggest misconception is about conservatism?
You know, I wanted to write the book and put my own thoughts into what conservatism is for one reason, and that is, and this book is not about Donald Trump, and it's not a response to Donald Trump, but Donald Trump definitely brought to fruition why I wanted to write this book. And in my view, I get frustrated because one, conservatism gets criticized from the left, which is understandable because it's politics. But then it gets maligned from the right because they don't understand, they don't know how to defend it, they don't know how to make it an attractive governing philosophy. And what I wanted to do, and others have written conservative books before, but what I want to do is sort of reset conservatism as an attractive governing philosophy. It used to be the philosophy of the Republican Party. That happened after Ronald Reagan, really when the Heritage Foundation was first on the scene in Washington, D.C. They were the first real conservative think tank in town. And Reagan basically cleaned out the Heritage Foundation because they all went into his administration. And Reagan did something that was needed. He made conservatism attractive because he took conservatism and gave it a friendly smile. Reagan was one of the most popular presidents in American history. He's still one of the most popular presidents in history. He certainly is the most popular still among Republicans, especially the baby boom generation and older. But I thought it was time to reset conservatism. And I think there's a lot of surprises in this book that people who may self-identify as conservatism may find. But the reason in some ways, it is a response to the Trump administration because Trump on so many issues, on trade, on economic policy, on debt, on tariffs, on the life issue is actually, in my view, 180 degrees out of phase with classic conservative thought. And I don't think the president could actually even articulate what a conservative is. I know a lot of Republicans today couldn't articulate what a conservative is. I boil it down to really two words. Conservatism to me is ordered liberty. And that is, it has to be liberty, meaning individual freedom was one of the most important things to the founding of our nation and continues to be. Nobody on the left or the right thinks that we shouldn't have liberty. They all fight for liberty. But ordered means that there has to be a government, a functioning government. So you have this push and pull between liberty and restraint. And that's what we work on, and that's what we have been working on since our birth certificate in 1776, is how do you balance liberty, people's ability to have freedom, with restraint. And so conservatism really is ordered liberty. And so I try to view everything, all the policies through that lens. And throughout the book, I look at each of the policies from healthcare to the gun issue to the life issue through ordered liberty. What is the ordered liberty perspective of this particular issue?
Well, you do write a lot about a lot of the big issues that shape the conservative movement. And I'd like you to talk about, you mentioned trade as one, and one of the other high profile issues that's been in the news more in the past 4 years was immigration. So could you talk a little bit about trade and immigration from your perspective and of conservatism?
Well, sure. On trade, I think the heart of the matter of trade is at the heart of humanity. What makes us human is our ability to create. And when people think about the human being as being creative, they often think of artwork, literature, music, but it's not just that. It's the services and goods that people do. They make their living at every single day, and trade is a moral right because we have a right to use our talent, whether it's offering a service or creating a product, and to sell it to the widest market available. And if you think about it, what right does government have to come between a buyer and a seller in a free market when you're buying a legal product? And I'll give you an example. So Donald Trump made a big deal out of his first trade agreement, which was the KORUS agreement, KORUS. That's the trade agreement that's been ongoing with South Korea. And that trade agreement, like all trade agreements, needed a few updates. So basically, he marginally, tinkered with it and called it a big breakthrough, and that the old KORUS, typical Donald Trump, the old KORUS was a terrible trade deal, and this was a much better deal for American workers. But here's what's interesting about it. What Trump did get in the KORUS trade agreement was he got the South Koreans to buy or to agree to buy up to 50,000 more cars. Now, they have a different emission standard than we do. So basically, they were saying, we'll take 50,000 of your non-compliant, American cars to come into South Korea where we have a higher standard for emissions. And they agreed to take those anyway and not to have them adjusted. And that was a big deal. Here's the problem. South Koreans aren't buying American cars. So he got this big, huge breakthrough that they were going to buy 50,000 cars, but South Koreans aren't buying. They don't want American cars. That's the free market, right? On the other end, he got the South Koreans to agree to ban buying South Korean pickup trucks or exporting South Korean pickup. Actually, it's not banned. What it is there's a 25% tariff on the South Korean pickup truck, which is why you will not see South Korean pickup trucks on American roads today, even though Kia makes them. In fact, Kia makes the Telluride, which is a beautiful V6, 386 horsepower pickup truck. But you can't buy one. Actually, you can buy one. You can go to your Kia dealer. You can special order it, and they're gonna slap you with a 25% tariff. Now, Trump wanted you to believe that the Chinese were going to pay that tariff, or in this case, the South Koreans were going to pay that tariff. Well, no, because what happens is when you order a South Korean pickup truck, and you can, it will come into Long Beach, California on a ship, and it'll be unloaded, and it'll be immediately impounded. And when it is impounded, you can go get your truck, or at least a dealer can, and they're going to say that that'll be a 25% tax, and the dealer will have to pay it. Now, you could argue that the dealer would absorb that cost. They won't, because there's not that big of a margin in pickup trucks. Or the manufacturer would absorb that cost. They won't, because there's no margin to absorb 25% tariff in pickup trucks. So who's going to pay the tariff? The consumer. And so what tariffs do is they keep people Americans from buying the products all over the world that they could buy at a much better price. Tariffs are terrible for consumers. It's a regressive tax, and it doesn't hurt the rich, because the rich can a 25% tax on tomatoes is not a problem, but a 25% on tomatoes means that a single mother with 3 kids can no longer afford tomatoes. And so tariffs are a really big problem. But the root of the whole trade is that if you're why would you produce something in your country that another country can buy cheaper? So wine is the easiest example of this. Scotland could certainly decide they don't want any more French wine, and they can create a process to grow Burgundies and Clarets in Scotland, and they could certainly make nice ones, but it probably costs about 6 times the cost. And so is that going to help the Scottish winemaker? Probably not, because in the long run, when prices get so high, people just don't buy products. And if you look at the trade agreements of NAFTA and there's TPP, although without us, because Trump got out of that deal, free trade around the world has made products like the one I'm talking to you through, and the one all of you are watching on, or the 4K television set many of you have in your living rooms, or even the one you can get that is all internet smart, literally for hundreds of dollars. That happens because of free trade. People often complain about the Walmarts of the world and the Targets of the world, and that's true, and I understand that. But people shop at those stores, and Target and Walmart, in my view, have done more to raise up the standard of living for the poor than most government programs or state government programs ever had. So free trade is it's a moral issue. And by the way, NAFTA free trade, yes, it hurt some industries. Yes, some people lost their jobs, but on balance, millions of jobs were created and quite a bit of economic activity. And you know who benefited the most from free trade? Not only Americans, but the Mexicans did. We do an enormous amount of trade with Mexico. Canada is actually our biggest trading partner. And so, yeah, do the Chinese cheat? Yeah, you bet they cheat. But you know what? Americans love Chinese products. Why? They keep buying them. And we have a trade deficit with China, which everybody gets upset about. In the same way that you have a trade deficit with your grocery store. You know, you keep buying things from them, they buy nothing from you. You don't have to buy things from China. It's hard not to, but we do. Why? Because they make cheap products that are cheap, and we seem to like them. I'll tell you, on the immigration issue, I'll tell you an interesting story. I was at MSNBC. I was on Casey Hunt's show on Sunday night, KCDC. And I came out of the set and I came into the green room, and Senator Angus King was in the green room. I know him because we both, we're in Maine politics, and he's the Maine senator. And he said, he pointed to a staff member, and he said, "Tell Rick what you just told me." And she says, "I'm so surprised that you are advocating so passionately for immigrants." And I said, "Oh, well, immigration used to be a Republican issue, used to be a conservative issue." And Angus King said, "Yeah, it used to be. Too bad it isn't anymore." And my point that I made on KCDC is that when Trump kept talking about these caravans coming up which was all scare tactics, that we should send buses. If I'm gonna collect Social Security and I'm getting closer and closer to it, and Medicare and Medicaid, someone's gonna have to do all this work, and someone's gonna have to be paying into that system. And we just don't have enough people in the United States to sustain that system for very long. We're going to need to import workers as quickly as possible. This was all pre-pandemic, but it was certainly true then, and is going to be true in the future. And the thing is, Ronnie, with immigration is, when I look back at the history of immigration, and it's shameful for Americans because we're such a great country who's built on immigrants, and we all seem to agree about that, but we just keep forgetting. Every generation we forget. When the Jews came over, we treated them horribly. And when the Germans came over, we treated them terribly. Oh, when the Irish came over, they were the worst. They were treated just so bad. The Italians, the same story. And it's over. And you know what? They made the same arguments then as they do now. And you know what the primary arguments are? There's two of them. One's economic and the other is cultural. One of the economic arguments is they're going to take all your jobs. And that has never proven to be true. The immigration, by and large, has made America bigger, better, stronger, more economically. And the idea that immigrants take up more resources than they get is flat out wrong. All the studies show that all the immigrants who come into this country legal or not. And I prefer legal. I don't support illegal immigration, but we have an irrational immigration policy that absolutely needs to be fixed. And you know who's getting the Latinos, which aren't primarily coming from Mexico anymore. They're coming from 3 countries. They're coming from Ecuador, Honduras, and El Salvador, and mostly because they're getting killed at home. Mm-hmm. And so we've sent people back who were murdered by their boyfriends, within days, from mostly MS-13, from the gangs. And first of all, Donald Trump said there's no room for them. Well, you know what? You can drive across this country, and I have done it on a motorcycle, and you can do it and only visit small towns. This country is vacant. And then people say, well, no, most of that land is inhospitable. Guess what? Las Vegas, Nevada was inhospitable. If Las Vegas, Nevada, you couldn't live, you'd be out of your mind to build a city in Las Vegas, Nevada. But guess what? They did it. Las Vegas, Nevada is one of the most vibrant cities in America because they built something in the desert that was inhospitable, that gets to 120 degrees during the day. And a lot of immigrants, by the way, live there. And if we don't figure out, and it's just a basic human right that people have the right to pursue their best life for themselves and their children. Now, I want them to do it legally. I want to emphasize that. But we have an irrational system. And by coincidence of birth, that people can't move around the world to pursue their best life, I just think that's wrong. We need a rational immigration policy. And the people who are getting the latest bad treatment is the Latinos and the Muslims, and they said, well, they're gonna take away our culture. Well, you know what? Most of us don't worship in a temple. Most of us don't speak Italian. Most of us did not become Catholic. Most of us did not adopt German as our language when all of these waves of immigration came through. And I don't suspect that we will be facing Mecca doing daily prayers in Spanish anytime soon. Yeah. Because somehow the American culture, when people come over, they assimilate and they become American. We don't worry about them. And I give people a test, and of course you'll get the answer now because I've already sort of given it away. Yeah. But I always say to people, what does Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Rudy Giuliani have in common? And people think, oh, well, let's see, they're both from the Northeast. That's true. Nancy Pelosi was from Connecticut. They're both about the same age. Yep, that's true too. Yep, they're both politicians. Yep, what else? And you know what never comes to their mind? They're both Italian Americans, and their last names give them away. And yet it doesn't come to people's minds immediately. It's because we just think about them as Americans. And there'll be a time, hopefully not too far in the future, where I'll say 2 names like Hernandez and Rodriguez, and people will say, I don't know, what Hernandez and Rodriguez? Well, they're both Hispanic. Oh, I would have thought of that as just give me another man. I didn't know that, I didn't know that. But that's just the nature of immigration and assimilation. And we ought to learn the lessons from the past, and we ought to treat people with dignity.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I'm glad that that's why I wanted you to speak about this, because this makes me want to ask you, do you think that traditional conservatism a la Ronald Reagan has been co-opted by some of the Republicans? Because
part of the reason I want to write my book is because I think they just are lost. Mm-hmm. They embraced Donald Trump. And here's what I was saying all through the primary. And so a lot of people are saying now, oh, we didn't know Donald Trump was like this. Of course you knew he was like this. He's been like this his whole life. Donald Trump, for the large part of his life, was a Democrat. He has been a Republican. He ran briefly under Ross Perot's Reform Party. He's been all over the map. He's mostly given to Democrats. He has given to Republicans, but he's given to Democrats and Republicans. But as a conservative, I go to a lot of conservative cabals, as I'm sure progressives have gone to a lot of progressive cabals, where you get together with people who think like you. And so I've gone to a lot of those events. And guess what? I never saw Donald Trump there. Mm. I never saw Donald Trump with us. He wasn't with the conservatives. And then all of a sudden he shows up and he says he's a conservative, except all his policies are 180 degrees out of phase with conservatism. And then he wins the nomination and says, oh, well, he's got to win. And then they were going to win. They would say, we got to win, we got to win, we got to win. And my question was, okay, we got to win. But if we win, what is it we win? What do we get? Do we get conservative policies? My bet was we wouldn't. And guess what? We didn't, by and large. We can argue about judges. That was one. You can argue about deregulation, which a lot of the business community and Republicans certainly supported, and I supported. But Donald Trump, in terms of lasting legacy, Donald Trump will be remembered for basically two things. One, and maybe we'll talk about this later in questions and answers, but one, he'll be remembered for January 6th, the insurrection on the Capitol. That's what he's going to be remembered for. And two, the fact that during his administration, over 375,000 Americans succumbed needlessly, in my opinion, to COVID because of the horrendous, reckless, incompetent mismanagement of the disease that is preventable. That's not to say not everybody would have gotten it or not everybody would have died, but largely preventable. And we so mismanaged. Those are the two things that Donald Trump will be remembered for. In terms of lasting policy, meaning real change in government reform, Trump's term in office will be inconsequential. And the reason I say that is because fiscal conservatives like me and a lot of Republicans have been railing about limited government and draining the swamp and controlling spending and getting rid of pork barrel politics and special interests, lobbying and all the rest of it. And yet Donald Trump just signed a $1.4 trillion discretionary spending bill that had, guess what? Pork barrel spending, special interests, carve-outs for lobbyists. If Washington won, Donald Trump got no real lasting change. All of his executive orders, and he had quite a few of them, those can all be changed with a stroke of a pen. He pulled us out of WHO. Joe Biden will put us back in. He pulled us out of the JCPOA, the deal with Iran. Joe Biden will likely put us back in. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Joe Biden will likely put us back in. And he'll do that with a stroke of a pen. As for tax cuts, I think what will happen is because the COVID virus was so mismanaged that the economy collapsed, and we still have millions of jobs that have not come back. That didn't need to happen. But because it did, Joe Biden will argue successfully, and probably rightly in my view, because although I'm a conservative, we have come to a point where we have put a lot of money out there to help people keep their home, pay their mortgage, feed their kids, make ends meet. And now we're going to cut them off. I think he will argue very successfully that the tax cuts to corporations and wealthy individuals is just not a priority from helping people from losing their homes. I think he'll win that. And so I think the tax cuts will likely be repealed in some form and you'll get higher taxes. Now, in another day and age, I would argue against that. But today I can hardly argue with it.
Yeah. I want to go back to the book, and we will talk a little bit more about Biden, and we'll talk a little bit more about January 6th. But I want to go back to something that I think is really important in the book. One of the misconceptions that, and I think I've asked you this before, Rick, that people have about conservatives is that they don't care about social programs. It kind of goes along with what you're talking about now with helping people. So in the book, you tell a story about Beverly and her situation. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's a good example of how conservatism really isn't against social programs.
Well, my wife and I met Beverly through our church, and she became a friend, and she had mental health issues. We always had her for Thanksgiving and Christmas because we never wanted her to be alone. And come to find out too late that her house was going to be repossessed, as many people's houses were after 2008. And it was too late to save her house. There was no way we could intervene some way in which she could keep the house. So she lost her house and she became homeless. She lived here for a while in our home. And we struggled to get her to fill out the necessary paperwork so she could qualify for Section 8 housing and disability, so that she could have a place to live and have a modicum of income so she could feed herself, which she was perfectly capable of doing. She was very disorganized in a lot of other ways, but she could do that. And she just didn't have the mental capacity to, and she was a smart person. She was a registered nurse. So she went through the rigors of becoming a nurse, and she worked in a hospital for many, many years in Massachusetts. So she was an intelligent person. She knew a lot about a lot of things, but she did have mental health issues that prevented her from filling out basic paperwork to get help. And in the end, we discovered that, you have to hire a lawyer basically to get these things done, because it's complicated, but she couldn't even get the paperwork together. Anyway, we got it done. But then I met another friend of mine who's perfectly capable, and I asked him, I was kind of catching up. What are you doing? And he says, well, I'm on disability. Now, I knew he had diabetes, and that's a devastating disease, but I knew his condition, and he was perfectly capable of working. And what I came to find out was, he had no problem filling out the paperwork because he was completely competent and could fill out the paperwork and qualified for government assistance, while Beverly, we were struggling with, couldn't get government assistance because she was incompetent. And it struck me that while we support a safety net, and I support a safety net, so many people struggle to even be caught in that safety net because they're either unaware of the program, they're not capable of doing what's necessary to qualify for the program, and yet there are other people on that program who could work, not physical work, but work, and it just struck me. Now, having said that, we aren't unique. Churches and mosques and synagogues all across this country, if you go to any of them, you'll find people who do this every single day. They don't make the newspaper. You won't see them on TV. They're not talking heads. They just go out and help other people. And I've always said, and I think I mentioned this in the book, that if everybody just helped one person, or just half the people would just help one person, and it isn't even that, if just 1 out of 10, which is basically more what it's like, would just help one person, there would be so much less need. Mm-hmm. And some people like Beverly are going to need a lot more than one person to help her, because you just need, you can't, and there's some people who are going to need people all the time, and they're always going to need help. They're not going to get better. They're not, you can't go to them with this sort of, what people say is a conservative attitude, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard, get up in the morning. It's not going to help Beverly. She wasn't going to. Now, Beverly passed. She eventually succumbed. She had a heart attack. She was very unhealthy, very overweight, diabetic. But she was never going to get better. And there are people out there all the time. They're just going to need someone all the time. And I don't have an issue with safety nets and government safety nets, but here's what I do have an issue with. If in fact we say as a society that the government should take care of people who are in need, and again, I think we do need to help the truly needy. But here's the problem. When you are walking in DC or Baltimore or New York City or wherever you live, and you see a homeless person and they ask for help, and in your mind you say, well, that's why I pay taxes. And by gosh, that's why they have all these government programs to help all these people. And you see, what government can't do, no matter how, it can't be compassionate. It is an immaterial thing. There are great who work in government. There are great people who work in bureaucracies who have big hearts, but their hearts are open to their family and their friends and the few people that they can help. They can't be open to their clients that they're trying to help, even though they're trying to do the big thing. And what people need as human beings is they need more than a government program and more than a check. And I'm not advocating against a check, and don't worry, I'm not advocating we get rid of welfare. But they need a person. They need a person to connect to relate to rely on. And we have to decide, is that the kind of society? And as conservatives and as a Republican Party, do we decide that's who we want to be as a party? That doesn't mean we have to give up our conservative values. It just means that we have to approach the issues of poverty from a different perspective.
Mm. Okay, so do you think conservatism is good for America then?
So I'll say it this way. Many people, and this is what I guess they say, conservatives are heartless. They don't care about people. They're greedy. They're selfish. I've heard them all. And I don't say that about progressives. I disagree with progressives and the progressive philosophy. Teddy Roosevelt was progressive, and Teddy Roosevelt viewed that government was a force. Overall, the government was a force for good, and I think that's good. And progressives see government as a force for good, and I don't disagree with that. I think that progressivism is a rational philosophy. It's not my philosophy. I think that conservatism, similarly, is a rational philosophy. And that's what I try to present in my book, that it's a rational philosophy. It's a compassionate philosophy. It's a pro-growth philosophy, and not just for the rich. In fact, I talk a lot about markets, and the thing that's so misunderstood about markets is, for instance, we talk when we're in markets. People say, well, Wall Street or people, the market is a free market is all about greed and selfishness. And if you really think about it, greed is hoarding assets to oneself. An entrepreneur can't do that. They have to take assets and allocate them out and push them away from themselves as quickly as possible. It's actually the opposite of greed. You cannot be a good entrepreneur and be greedy, because you constantly have to invest the capital in personnel, employment, the idea, all of it, marketing, all of it. It's, you got to move money away from you as quickly as you can. And selfishness is interesting because you'll never be a good entrepreneur if you're selfish, because when you wake up in the morning, a successful entrepreneur thinks about the needs, wants, and desires of other people. That's because they want to fulfill the needs of other people. What people often mistake is capitalism is actually corporatism, which is the idea, and I write about it a lot in the book, is this idea of how governments distort markets and how corporations use government and lobbying in their legislatures to protect their industries, which is lobbying, and that's not free market. That's corporatism, and those are protected markets. It has nothing to do with that's mercantilism. It has nothing to do with free markets. So I try to make a case for what true capitalism is. So in that, progressives believe that their governing philosophy is rational. And there are lots of progressive governments. There are lots of social democratic governments around the world, and many of them they do well. They're very successful. But I think a free market conservative philosophy is a better philosophy, and that's simply what I argue. I don't say that they're terrible and evil, and that we're good and we're all angels, and I hope they wouldn't do the opposite. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get to is that if you're going to criticize conservatism, please at least know what it is.
Right. That's a good thing. And that's why reading your book is important, so that people will learn. Like I said before, it's got a lot of interesting facts about conservatism. One of the things that you didn't get to address in the book, and maybe you may want to do this in the future, is what can conservatism offer minorities, the BIPOC population, or LGBTQ? That's
liberty. I didn't write about that at all in the book, other than I touched on it a bit in the immigration, because of the prejudice that immigrants often suffer during the system. Look, there are a lot of conservative minorities, minorities who've embraced the conservative philosophy. I just think that conservatives and Republicans have done a terrible job of communicating their philosophy. And I think it's a very attractive philosophy. I think it would be in particular attractive to African Americans and to Latinos. In fact, I'll tell you a story. Right after 9/11, I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was working for GOPAC at the time, and we were out training, doing a lot of political training. And we had, in those days, we sent faxes. And so we sent a fax out to all the county state parties to send someone for Latino training. I was one of the trainers, but I wasn't all of them. And I wasn't a Latino. And when I got there, what was interesting is there was 100 people that showed up, and every one of them was Latino. And that was a real problem for me because it wasn't meant for them. Because what would happen was when people got the fax and they said Latino outreach training, they said, oh, well, that's for, Maria, who does our Latin outreach. She should go to this. Well, Maria is Mexican and she doesn't need to know about Latin outreach. She lives in the community. And so it was really an embarrassing situation. And so for 4 hours, I got a lecture from 100 Latinos because there's nothing I could teach them. And so I just turned it over to them and let them talk about the issues they were having, attracting Republicans to the party. And I'm so glad it happened because I learned so much from the 4 hours I can never tell you. One of the things I learned was they're alone, is being an African-American or a Latino and being a conservative is a lonely proposition. And because you get shouted down sometimes by your own family and friends. And so it was really cathartic for them because they were all together and they could talk about conservative philosophy and not be shouted down.
That leads me to something that you wrote about in your book. You said prioritizing relationship is what is lacking in our political discourse. And you wrote about that in reference to your relationship with Newt Gingrich and the fact that you and Newt did not see eye to eye on Trump. So
no, we still don't. But
that's too bad. But
no, we don't. He supports Trump. I do not. I have a lot of friends who support Trump, but what's most important to me is to maintain the relationship. I have lost friends over being critical of Trump, and that's a shame because I think relationships are actually more important. And I would advise people who are struggling with this themselves is better not to talk about politics if it will destroy your relationship than it is to keep your relationship, because your relationships will last. Politics will come and go. It has for many, many years. People like to say this is the most important election of our lifetime. I've heard that for every election. It's a little trite by now. We will always have challenges. We'll always have elections, but your friends are precious.
Yes, that's why I wanted you to speak about this, because that's you see all the time people, saying they want to unfriend people on Facebook because they don't agree with them, and but like you said, the relationships are precious. So also in the book, you say losing is the best thing that can happen to you. Tell us why. And then I would like to know if you think that Trump learned anything from losing, although he doesn't think he lost. So.
Well, I think losing politically is an important thing. And I mean, it's not it's a terrible experience. Yeah. But here's what happens when you win. Let's say when you win, what happens is you get all caught up in winning, and you have to prepare for whatever it is you won. So if you won public office, you're going to have to prepare to take office. And if you got a job like president, then that's just an all-encompassing job. You got to make appointments and all that other thing. So the point is, you never go back and sort of do a what do you call it, an after action report of what happened during the campaign. So you literally don't learn anything most of the time. When you lose, you didn't get the job because market share in politics is binary. It's 100% market share or 0% market share. And this time Trump will get 0% market share. Joe Biden will get 100% market share. And most of the time when you lose, you think about all the things that you could have done better, and you did wrong. And so you learn a great deal. And so if you are new to politics and working in the political field and you lose right away, take heart, your career is all ahead of you. You will lose again, but if you learn how to take the lessons out of losing, then you'll do fine. And so, no, I don't think Trump will learn a thing from losing, because I don't actually believe Trump thinks he won. I really don't.
No.
But he did get his supporters, many of them, to believe that he did.
Yeah. Okay, shifting a little bit, in an interview you did with Yahoo News when your book came out, you predicted that the Republican Party would be decimated and have a monopoly on the executive and legislative branches. And if Tommy Tupperville was asking you, he would say the three branches of government. But why do you think that's a good thing? And congratulations for predicting this. You were right, Rick.
Well, yeah, Donald Trump is the first president to lose the White House, the House, and the Senate all in one term. That hadn't happened since Herbert Hoover. People like to say that Obama did that, and while it's true, he did lose the House and the Senate, he didn't do it. It wasn't over one term, and he actually never lost a race himself. He won re-election. He served a full 8 years. Donald Trump lost his re-election, and so he's been a disaster for the party. There's just no other way to look at it. I thought the Republicans would probably had done worse in 2020. They didn't. I think there are very good reasons for that. But going into 2022, and depending on what happens, if Donald Trump becomes a dominant force in 2022 and is raising money and recruiting and funding candidates, it'll be a disaster for the Republican Party, for the simple reason that they will win primaries in statewide elections. So I'm talking about governor, U.S. senator, district, attorney general, in some cases, what am I trying? I want to say vice governor, the second governor, lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
So anybody in a statewide race, they will easily win primaries. They will get hammered in general elections. And so what'll happen is you'll get the Democrats will do very well in the Senate and the governor's races, and you'll get a bunch of lunatics in Congress because they will win these gerrymandered red districts, and that's not going to do well. So I think over time, unless the party, here's what I think the party needs to do. Honestly, I know my party doesn't agree with my former party. I'm not a Republican anymore, but I think the Republican Party needs to take responsibility for January 6th. They need to renounce Donald Trump, and they need to de-Trumpify the Republican Party. And unless they're willing to do that, the party will fade in. It'll become a regional party. It will still exist, but it won't be a national party anymore.
Well, George Will recently, the conservative columnist, wrote a lot about the aftermath of January 6th. And he said we now have a three-party system: Democrats, Hawley Cruz Republicans, and he also said they are domestic enemies. And then there's the McConnell Sass Republicans. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not encouraged by that.
No. So,
it's interesting. I've always been an anti-establishment Republican in that I've always maintained being a conservative. And my argument is always, which is why I wrote the book, and my argument is we just don't explain conservatism very well. And because I think it's actually an attractive philosophy. And so if we have the sedition party and the old guard party, what kind of a choice is that? I think there's still room, and this is the argument we're going to have, Joan, because my friends in the Republican Party are very soon going to, and they already have, started pointing to people like me and saying it's all your fault. If you and Rick Wilson and Bill Kristol had just gone on board with Donald Trump, he wouldn't have lost and we wouldn't be in all this trouble. And I'm sorry,
no.
I can't do that.
No. Well, Mitt Romney also recently said that the 2020 election shows that the American public is more conservative than progressive. Do you agree with that?
The country has largely been a center-right party. And we always think it's hard to think about this without understanding the way we're trained to think in politics. So let me take a few issues.
Okay.
On immigration, what are the two solutions that are offered and not, by the other side? In other words, the Democrats say the Republicans believe this, and the Republicans say the Democrats believe this, and you know what they are. The Democrats say that the Republicans want to deport everybody, round everybody up and deport them at midnight, right? You've heard that hyperbole.
Right.
And the Republicans say the Democrats want open borders. I don't know of a single member of Congress, and there are a lot of liberals and a lot of progressives in Congress, very progressive. I don't know a single one that is a call for open borders.
No.
I'm just saying, okay? On the same hand, I don't know anybody, well, there might be a couple. There might be a couple Republicans who would say round them up and deport them at midnight tonight. But life doesn't work like that. We don't operate in binaries. And you can go through all the issues on healthcare, on taxation, and no one goes to binaries. We find a compromise. In fact, if you were to sum up our governing system, which is why Donald Trump doesn't make a good president. By the way, most CEOs won't. So careful in the future when a CEO comes along and says, I'm a businessman, I know how to fix government. I can tell you one thing, he has no idea what he's talking about. Here's why, is because our system is built on one word, compromise. CEOs lack one word, compromise. When a CEO speaks, people move. They do this, they do that. He gives out directives and edicts, and everybody moves. That's not how government works. Government works that you have to convince the other party that it's in their best interests that we all come together and get something done. That will be true of the next stimulus package as it comes along. The Democrats and Republicans will agree that it's best to get something done, right? And we can get an enormous amount done if we just learn to compromise. It doesn't mean we give up our principles. It means we give a little bit of them of what they want so they can go home to their constituents and say they got this, and they give a little bit to us. And now the trick is you try to get more than they do. And then that's always going to go on. But this binary of, oh, I can't support that because there's this little thing they put in there and I'll never be able to vote for that is ridiculous. Yeah. And we really got to get out of that. And I think there's a number of ways to do that. One is we really have to fix the gerrymandering problem. We have one. And there is a solution to it. Some states have found it, others have not. And I think we need to move to a national popular vote. And that doesn't mean we have to get rid of the Electoral College. It just means that enough states have to agree to throw all their electors to the winner of the national vote. That movement is well underway. And as soon as they get to enough states to reach 270, we will have a national popular vote and the popular president will win. Now, Democrats say, well, Hillary Clinton would have won. Well, she might have, she might not have. But you see, because when you have an electoral vote strategy, I read about this in the book, it's called the failing grade of the Electoral College.
Right.
Is Hillary Clinton would have run a completely different campaign if she was running for actually, in fact, it's a good illustration. Donald Trump would have run a different campaign if he was going for the popular vote. He didn't. He ran an electoral college campaign. Hillary Clinton's problem actually was she ran an electoral college campaign until she thought she had won the electoral college. Then she wanted to win the popular vote in such a massive way that she could declare a mandate. Having done that, she neglected the electoral college vote strategy and she lost the upper Midwest. But she won by 3 million votes. She got the popular mandate, but it was no good, remember, because there's no market share in politics. She got 0% of the market share and Donald Trump got 100%. Because the strategy of running a national popular vote campaign is completely different than running a state-by-state campaign. And here's why that's important, is because if you look at this last election cycle, we know the 6 states that got all the attention. None of the attention was paid to any other states. And so we end up having national agendas based on things like Iowa corn, although they weren't a swing state in this case, in this time, steel, auto manufacturing. Those are all great things. Don't get me wrong. They're all great things. But we talk about steel, we talk about auto manufacturing. Why? Because we have to win the upper Midwest votes. If we had a national popular vote, your Democratic vote in Texas would be just as important as your ruby red Republican vote in Bakersfield, California. That's what would happen. One person, one vote, equal. So the Democrat in Texas would be equally as important as the Republican in California, or the Republican in New York, or the Democrat in Oklahoma. I think that's the direction we need to go in, so that all the people's interests get represented.
So we'll still have the electoral college, but we'll have it.
Yes, and if people don't like it, if the states don't like it, they can withdraw, and then others can join. But let's give it a try. Let's not throw out a constitutional provision. The problem is, and we see this recently, people want to change all kinds of things because of what happened on January 6th. And my argument is the Constitution worked. We didn't like it. It hurt. It pushed the guardrails. It tested the limits. It made us emotional. But in the end, it worked. It's going to work. Don't fix what's broken. Keep it. It's a brilliant system. And when we start tinkering with it, we start fixing things that we get unintended consequences. The founders had a good idea of why we need an electoral college vote. And my contention is, I think let's try a national popular vote. If it doesn't, then let's keep the state's interests in national elections.
Okay. So I want to talk to you about something that's on your website, your blog, that's entitled, "If Joe Biden is the Answer, What Was the Question?" You write, "Joe Biden may not be the answer to my conservative idealism, but for now, he's willing to help me kill the alligator closest to my utopian vote." So please tell us about that, Rick.
Well, that goes back to your earlier observation, is that, I predicted Donald Trump would be a disaster for the Republican Party, and that they would lose the House and lose the Senate and lose the White House, and they lost all three. And he was the biggest danger to the Republican Party and to conservative ideals, because Donald Trump doesn't really have an ideological philosophy. The closest it comes is populism. It's really egocentric, or egocentrism. And a party cannot be governed by a personality, because personalities pass on. A lot of countries do that, by the way. When Bibi Netanyahu passes on, when he leaves the stage, the Kadima party, that's his party in Israel, will also cease to exist, in my opinion, because there's nothing underneath it except for him. That's been true in a lot of, that's certainly true in Israeli politics. It's true in a lot of other places. Parties come and go because they're based on personality. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are not, or should not be, based on personality, but based on a set of governing philosophies and ideals. I would like the conservative ideals to be, once again, get to eat at the grown-ups table at the Republican Party. We've not only been taken away from the kids' table, we've been thrown out the door. So we don't get invited to dinner anymore. And the Democrats have their arguments about which wing of their philosophical spectrum will dominate. They're always going to have that argument. And so I voted for Joe Biden because I felt that Donald Trump was going to continue to be a disaster, not only to the party, but to the country that has borne itself out. And so I'm proud of my vote for Joe Biden. I hope Joe Biden is a very successful president. He wouldn't be my first choice. I don't know that I'll support many of his policies, and I will say so. But he beat Donald Trump, and for that we can, I think, at least I'm grateful.
Well, Speaking of Biden, and thanks to the people of Georgia, now we have Biden can probably get the cabinet that he wants. And what do you have to say about the composition of the cabinet? People thought he would appease the left, but it looks like he's, getting the band back together and having more moderate and experienced cabinet.
I think Joe Biden struck the balance pretty well, actually, because while he's getting some criticism from the left, he will, but they got a lot. They got a lot, and he picked the first African-American woman to be his vice president. That's a historic achievement,
right?
And that's a lot. And there will be others. I don't have the list of the names in front of me, But I know he's picked a lot of experienced people. And you know what? We need a lot of experienced people, and there are a lot of experienced minorities, and there's a case being made that, you know, they can think of many, many experienced minorities. But Joe Biden, I've met Joe Biden several times. I don't know him well. I don't really know him at all. But my judgment of him is he is comfortable around the people he knows. It doesn't matter if they're white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people. He's just comfortable around the people he knows. So he's chosen a lot of the people that he knows he can rely on, who are competent, that he can depend on. So that's my assessment of who Joe Biden has picked.
Do you think he's the right person for the job now?
Well, yes, because the American people voted him
Right.
in.
I know. But as far as like his temperament in handling everything that's going on.
Joe Biden has been in the Congress, I think, for 36 years. He has, he's a skilled legislator. The problem with Donald Trump is he didn't actually know how the Congress worked, thank God. One of the problems with people who do know how the Congress works is we get all the wrong stuff done quickly. And so that's probably my biggest worry about Joe Biden. But when we need to get some things done, like we have a massive infrastructure problem.
Yes.
And that Donald Trump promised to fix and didn't touch. That's going to need to get done. And Joe Biden, I think, could put that together. We have a massive economic crisis for many of Americans. And so we need to get the country back working again. So we need a balance between, you know, making sure that companies can stay in business. And this primarily is the service industry. The restaurant business has just been devastated. And how to keep people employed and get them back to work and get the economy going. The good news is, you know what? Joe Biden's done this before. He did it with Barack Obama. I'll argue, and I have argued, that it was very slow economic recovery. But guess what? It was a recovery. Yeah. And over time, it was a pretty impressive recovery. The growth from what Barack Obama was left in after 2008 economic collapse. And by the way, if I could explain that briefly to people that don't understand what happened there. See, you had all these poor people, and they wanted to buy houses, and politicians said, well, we should make them be able to buy houses. So what we'll do is we'll get all these rich people, equity markets, to invest in the poor people's houses. And they'll go in together. Won't that be wonderful? We have the rich people and the poor people, and we'll go into the houses. And then the poor people got into the houses and that they could marginally afford. And when things got bad, they couldn't afford. Mm. And when the poor people lost their house, you know what happened? The poor people lost their house and the rich people all got bailed out. Isn't that interesting? Mm. And that was just wrong. And I hope we don't do that again. And we're already doing it again. We saw that with this last stimulus. Whether you were homeless or buying a second home, you got the same amount of money.
Yeah.
Right? And so we need to figure out how this money could be more targeted and better, and that money isn't just going after votes, it's going after trying to help people who are really in need of help.
Okay. So a lot of, we have to talk about what's going on now. Today, the House introduced one article of impeachment for the president on incitement of insurrection. What are your thoughts on that? You know, the Republicans are saying, oh, you're going to divide the country and you're not going to get the Senate will spend time on this and not what the other things they should be doing. So what are your thoughts?
I've heard the Republicans say that, and it's nonsensical. On the one hand, they don't want to go through the impeachment proceeding because what they really want to do is help Joe Biden with his agenda, right?
Yeah,
I don't think so. And the Democrats, because they're in charge right now, they get the majority in the House and Senate. So no, I'm not buying that argument that they don't have time to do impeachment because they want to help the Democrats with their agenda. Remember, the Democrats can't set the Republicans have no ability to set agendas anymore. They lost that privilege. I just want to know from actually every politician in Washington, every member of Congress, not just the Republicans, but every member should tell their constituents, what was January 16th? What was it? What do you believe it was? They need to go on record. What do you believe it was? Do you think this was a Chuck E. Cheese birthday party where a few people, got a little out of hand and caused a problem for all the rest of the people at Chuck E. Cheese, which is what many people want me to believe? Or do you think that Donald Trump told a lie about election fraud, convinced thousands of people to come to DC to, quote, save their country, and that they had to fight or they were going to lose their country, and that he was going to march up Pennsylvania Avenue? I'll be with you, he said. Twice he said that. I'll be with you. So he was going to walk up to the Capitol with them because we have to stop what they're doing. First of all, they couldn't have stopped anything. Whether they stopped anything and they did stop anything for a time, it wouldn't have mattered. For one, Joe Biden's going to be president on January 20th at 11:59:59. And two, Donald Trump's term ends January 20th at 11:59:59. It doesn't matter what they do. Donald Trump will not get a second term, period. He's not even in contention for getting a second term. But the problem was all these people, the 8,000 people marched up Pennsylvania Avenue, believed something different because Donald Trump told them a lie. They marched up Pennsylvania Avenue and they breached the Capitol, who was horribly underprepared. And they broke windows, broke in. A Capitol Hill police officer was killed. One of the protesters, or I call them insurrectionists, was killed. And they desecrated the Capitol. They desecrated that magnificent building in Washington, D.C. that is the beacon of freedom, not just to us, but to all around the world. And I've heard from my friends around the world. We look to you. We feel like you're our mainstay. You're our steady. You're what we can depend on. You're what we do aspire to. And they breached that Capitol to do what? People with zip ties? What were they going to do with those zip ties? They were not chanting, hang Joe Biden. No one chanted that. They chanted, hang Mike Pence, the vice president of the United States, who was in that Capitol. And things could have gone horribly wrong. So I just need to know from every politician out there, do you think this was an insurrection? Or do you think it was something else? Do you think Donald Trump incited it? Or do you think they just kind of all did it on their own? And that needs to be clear because there can be no ambiguity here. This date, and I'll keep referring to it as January 6th, so people will know what I'm talking about. January 6th goes down with December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021. Those are 3 days in which the homeland was attacked. In the latter, it was attacked by fellow Americans. That is shameful, despicable, and it can never happen again.
And what about Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, especially Josh Hawley with the fist and cheering on the rioters, I want to call them. They weren't protesters.
Well, when Josh Hawley raised his fist to the mob, within that mob was the murderer of a Capitol Hill police officer. That's what he incited. And after the desecration of the Capitol, the killing of a police officer, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, I think ultimately about 6 other senators, and about 100 members of the House stood in the wreckage and perpetrated the lie. Now, they want to say they represent people who don't believe that we had a fair and free election. Well, I'm sorry, that's not what the constitutional oath that they swore to uphold and defend the Constitution. And that means they swore to uphold the truth. And they have an obligation to tell the truth to their own supporters that this election was not stolen. It was a fair and free election. There's been 60 plus court cases. There's been Georgia recounted 3 times, certified twice by a Republican governor and a Secretary of State who's a Republican, and they did a hand recount, which matched a machine recount. And Ted Cruz wants to call a federal audit. Think about this, a conservative, right? This is where we get back to the book. Ted Cruz wants to order a federal audit of state elections. Now, I don't remember conservatives going into the affairs of states and Washington, D.C. and the politicians there within from other states telling other states, no, who you said won the election didn't win the election. The other person won the election. And Ted Cruz says, oh, well, we'll just give them all assurance that it was a fair election. No, it won't. Georgia was counted 3 times. The machine matched the hand count. There were 2 Republicans certified it twice. And guess what they still say in Georgia? Joe Biden cheated. They will never be satisfied. So no recounts, no audits. It is what it is. Joe Biden's the president. Grow up, get over it.
Right. But Cruz and Hawley should they be censured, or people were asking about that?
Look, I can't think of a punishment horrible enough for them.
Okay.
But you know what? Sometimes when you live in a constitutional republic and you're upset about things and you want the right things to be done and you seek justice, sometimes you just have to tolerate the system that's built in. Josh Hawley is the senator from Missouri. Missouri will have to deal with him. Ted Cruz is a senator of Texas, and Texas will have to deal with him. Now, Ted Cruz might be in trouble because Texas may deal with him, because Beto O'Rourke, who, by the way, I don't think was a particularly strong candidate, although he had talent in many, many ways. But I think if you got a different candidate in there, he only lost to Beto by 3 points. I mean, Beto lost to Ted Cruz only by 3 points. Texas will go blue. It's just math. And so Ted Cruz better figure out which side of history he's going to be on right quick, because he's not going to be a senator for very long.
So a couple of people had sent in questions. Some of them came up in some of the questions I asked you, but we had one from actually somebody who follows you on Twitter. What do you think about the social media shutting down Trump's accounts? And is that a slippery slope or totally correct in this case?
Well, let me start out by it's totally correct.
Right.
Although I'm not comfortable with it entirely, right? And the reason I'm not comfortable is because you have these large companies basically censoring or deciding whose voice gets out there, doesn't get out there, right? So that worries me a little bit. Now, some people have said this is a First Amendment issue. This is not a First Amendment issue.
No.
This has nothing to do with the First Amendment. You can go out and get on the street corner and criticize your government. Don't tell me about First Amendment. There's no free speech issue here at all. These are private companies. And in fact, they can not only get rid of Donald Trump, they could decide tomorrow to get rid of all Republicans. If you're a registered Republican, we're just not going to let you on our platform.
Right.
They could do that. They're a private company. Parler could decide tomorrow, if you ever express a view about if in favor of Joe Biden, you're off. You're never going to be able to come on. Like, they can do that. They're a private company. So no, there's no First Amendment issue. There's no issue. I don't think we need a government solution to this. Another company will pop. We'll figure it out. But basically, I liken it to they have terms of service agreements, and people say they violated the agreement. Donald Trump signed on to an agreement when he agreed to be on Twitter. He consistently violated those agreements and then didn't care, and they finally got rid of them, and now he's surprised.
Yeah. So I want to just ask you a question, Rick. You've worked on a lot of campaigns and have trained people in running campaigns. Have you ever considered running for office yourself?
Oh, hell no.
Why?
I have thought of it. I don't know that it drives me. I do enjoy very much working with candidates. I very much enjoy working on campaigns. I love to help candidates hone their leadership skills and their speaking ability and their debate ability and how to frame issues and educate them about issues and all of those things. But in terms of the day-to-day slog of legislation, I'm not so sure.
That's not your thing.
I won't rule out that I'm running for president, though.
You won't rule it out? No. Okay. Well, let me know if you're going to do that. So, the ultra-conservative German statesman Otto von Bismarck once said, "Politics is the art of possible." What advice would you give President-elect Biden?
Oh, it'd be really hard to give him advice. I think there's a couple things. I mean, Biden has his plate full going in, as you know.
Yeah.
And I think his challenges are threefold. One is he's got to deal with the coronavirus, which means he's got to get the vaccine into the arms of as many people as possible so that we can get back to normal. We can stop people from dying and infecting each other. And he's got to set a leadership example so that we can truly defeat this virus. And we can do it. We just haven't had the leadership. And so that's going to be job one. He's got some, really qualified help to do that. Ron Klain is his chief of staff, who's also actually an expert in infectious diseases and their control. He managed the Ebola virus. His second, which is subsequent to controlling the coronavirus, is getting the economy back on track. He has some experience with that. But you won't get the economy back on track if we don't defeat this virus. That's the big lesson that Trump never learned. And it's one, frankly, the American people never learned, because I kept seeing polls that saying, what's more important, the coronavirus or the economy? Well, you can't, they're connected. You can't separate them. If you think that the economy is really important, the coronavirus is not, you're missing the point. You have to defeat the coronavirus, or you cannot get the economy back. So that's the second challenge. And I think his third challenge is probably, and I don't know if I'll mix them together, or maybe they're co-equal. One is this country needs to be unified again. It is divided. It's been divided for its whole history. It's been divided. There were the loyalists and the patriots. There were the North and the South. There were people for Vietnam, against Vietnam. There are people for Trump and against Trump. We've always been divided. It's the nature of who we are. And leaders bring us back together. Tyrants tear us apart. And I think Joe Biden can demonstrate that he could be a leader and bring us back together. And in that, which is probably of equal weight, is race relations. Joe Biden can do an awful lot, I think, to help heal the nation on race and the problem with race. And I've learned a lot about this myself, because I have a lot of blind spots, and I let people point them out, and sometimes unsurprised. But I've learned about that there is such systemic, there's hatred and just outright evil racism. That's the racism many people think about. But there's also racism that means that African Americans and people of color suffer chronic diseases because they don't have access to healthcare. And I hear the Republicans say, well, everybody has access to healthcare. They go to the emergency room. Yeah, you can go to the emergency room when you go into a diabetic coma, and then they send you home until you either die or go back into a diabetic coma. But that person is not getting chronic care treatment, and that person needs chronic care treatment, and that's just one disease. So you got heart issues, disease issues, healthcare issues that the African American disproportionately suffers, and the justice system, which is just completely so plain on everybody's face by now that that needs to be systemically addressed. And it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge, but I think we can overcome it.
Okay. So Rick, I have one last question for you, and it's a fill in the blank. Rick Tyler is?
Rick Tyler is one word, or I can say whatever I want.
Say whatever you want. It doesn't have to be one word.
Rick Tyler is a Christian, a husband, a father, a conservative, or an American, and a conservative. How's that?
Okay, that sounds.
And delighted to be here.
that sounds extra great. So Rick, we were so delighted to have you here tonight. Thank you so much
Thank you. I'm
for
honored.
spending time with us, and hopefully hopefully one day post-pandemic, you'll come and visit us in person.
I'd love to.
Well, we're going to hold you to that. I want to recommend that everyone read the book. It's really interesting. And like I said, there's lots of interesting little nuggets in here of history that you may have learned and may not even remember. I also think the audiobook is great too, because you get to listen to Rick reading it. I want to give a special thanks to Joan Kuhn for organizing the program. And I also want to thank Andrew Farber, our library director, and the communication team who helped promote this program this evening. And of course, Carrie Krams, the executive director of Newcastle Community Media Center, for the production work. And again, Rick, we loved having you here with us virtually. And of course, last but not least, I want to thank all the viewers for watching us, and all of our library patrons. I hope that everyone will stay well and stay safe. And thanks again to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.